All right, Craig, can you translate all that conversation for us? Because
Yeah.
we're dumb. We don't know what's going on.
Well, I mean, let me give it a bash.
Yeah.
So the markets are in absolute turmoil. Before I start, would it be helpful if I explain do people know what a tariff is? Do people know how they work?
Well, we have explained it, but we're a couple of rodeo clowns from Dunedin. So why don't you give it to us again in case anyone out there, or if we got it wrong, Craig?
Oh, probably not. So a tariff is just a tax on any physical good that comes into a country. So normally you don't see tariffs on services. So if you go to the bank and you use a financial service, there usually isn't a tariff on that. It's usually on a something you can see and feel that comes into a country. You know, oil, food, other cars, and it's just a tax at the point of entry, and it just puts the price up in terms of that good. And the intention is that you put the prices up so that your own domestic consumers and your own domestic producers have more of a chance of selling those goods in your country. And that's it.
So we've basically been saying widget turns up to the wharf, you buy it, for the importer pays $10 for it, walks away. With a tariff, widget turns up to the wharf. Now it costs $10 plus $5 for the tariff on top, so it costs them $15. So when they used to make $10 on it, it would be sold for $20 because that's buy for 10, sell for 20. Now buy for 10, tax for 5, sell for 25. Price goes up in the shop.
Yeah, or if you're working on a ratio or a percentage, it actually goes up more because your profit margin may well be a percentage. And so if it goes up by $10, then it's essentially your profit margin goes up by $10, so it could be even more than that.
Yeah, so if you're making 100% on $10, then if it's now $15 and you still want the 100%, it's $15 more. Correct. So it'd be 30. Yeah, right. Wow.
So,
okay.
So as a consequence, you're now, so it depends upon what you're doing. But as some of your people are asking in the chat, there aren't usually tariffs on digital goods. There aren't usually tariffs on things you can't see and feel, because there's no way of actually being able to mark the transaction or being able to physically tax the good on the way through. Now, what Trump has done, he's put on reciprocal tariffs, as he calls them. Now, unfortunately, if you're coming to me for sense as to why those reciprocal tariffs were and are and how they've been calculated, I'm afraid you're in the wrong part of town, because there is no sense at all about how they have been done. Essentially, the list of countries chosen for the tariffs, some of them aren't countries, some of them are uninhabited.
Yeah, the one with penguins in it. There's one down south of us that's got 0 people in it.
Yeah, the Heard Islands has some penguins and some seal island and some seals, but not a lot of exports. But what they do relate to are internet domain names. So each country has its own, each territory has its own internet domain. So it seems like someone at the White House, rather than actually knowing the list of countries, has used the list of country internet domains and has used that to derive the tariffs. Now, in terms of the way in which those tariffs then work, I could show you a very complicated equation, which is frankly meaningless. Or let me just give you an example from New Zealand. Okay. So New Zealand exports around $5.6 billion US dollars of goods to the US every year. The trade deficit between New Zealand and the US, so the gap between what the US sells us and what we sell the US, is $1.1 billion. So that means the deficit is 19.64% of the total value of the goods that we sold to the US. That's where this 20% number turns up. Trump then said he was going to tariff half of that number. So that's how we end up with a 10% tariff. Are you following along?
Right. Yeah, well, I'm understanding what you're saying, but it's hard to fathom.
Yeah, because it's an utterly meaningless calculation. Yeah. So let's, for example, assume you decided to buy a Holden that was made in Australia.
Yep.
Yep. Now, that trade deficit is now dollars from New Zealand going to Australia. Yeah. But many of the parts for that Holden, because it's a General Motors vehicle, are made in the US and shipped to Australia. So Australia now has a negative trade deficit with the US, but we're buying those parts made in Australia. So we're basically buying them from the US. Can you see how now meaningless the trade deficits are? Because many of the
Brain's
goods
itchy.
that are purchased around the world are actually component parts made up of lots of transactions around the world.
Yeah.
So the raw trade deficit is a fairly pointless number.
And before I think there's no tariffs on Mexico and Canada. I think that's the case. But before they were doing that, the point that some people were making was a vehicle built in the US crosses those borders 7 times before it gets sold in the US. And that would have to be tariff. So, yeah.
And we had this in the UK during Brexit, where there were car plants in the UK that were taking part-assembled vehicles from Europe, putting motors in, putting different parts in, and then sending them back to Europe, or backwards and forwards. And at each point in time, we had to sign paperwork and documentation, and it slowed trade right down.
Yeah.
So the total value of all of the exports that we give to the US in New Zealand dollars is about $9 billion. And so that you're looking at about $900 million in new taxes on those exports.